Caveats. If you're the first speaker with a new group, I think there's sort of almost a blanking of imagery, and you can't really think, what am I meant to be doing, what I'm meant to be saying, and the context, how am I meant to be saying these things. Because I didn't really have a clear picture about this afternoon, I wasn't sure whether it should be highly academic or very chatty. I think it's turned out into something like a pagan sermon, which wasn't my original idea at all. I do such things, but that wasn't the idea. So it sounds to me, I was reading it this morning, more like an act of witness than anything else. That's one caveat. I also, I've been meeting, it's a time of reminiscences, isn't it, this time of year? A time of meeting old friends and old energies coming back into your life. I was reminded by some friends from my first university recently that I spent basically 3 years talking about Oswald Spengler. That's not quite my recollection, if I'm completely honest. But I suddenly thought, oh my God, yes, I did spend a lot of time talking about Spengler. Which means I'm rethinking what I'm saying to you today. All of this started, I think, when I joined the National Anarchist Facebook group page and got into a bit of a spat with various people about anarcho-primitivism. I think it's an incredibly interesting form of anarchism. And also, I was in the middle of having a book rejected by my Russian publisher. I thought they were meant to take my book because they felt it was too anarchistic. It's called Anarchy in Green. How can you not know what it's about? Okay, so I'm going through an argument with them at the moment. So what I'm going to say to you this afternoon is sort of what I'm thinking at the moment, but it's sort of not what I'm thinking at the moment. I'm revising everything. Leave on the back burner what you don't find helpful, take what you find out, what you do find helpful, and we can discuss it later if you want. But at the moment I'm rethinking this position, and we'll start from there. My book begins with this statement. Life is not for the likes of us, the workers, the underclass, the hired help, the temps, the auxiliary state personnel. That's actually a phrase from Karl Marx. The born and bred serfs of a nearly established global tyranny. It's much closer than you think. I move in all sorts of elevated circles. As far as they're concerned, it's a done deal. Forget your freedom, that's gone. Not an authentic life anyway. Just a utilitarian survival wherein we can produce ever more muscular but clearly subservient cattle for the ruling elite and their system. After all, it's much more fun, that's one of the attitudes, by the way, fun dominating a man than it is a machine, and of course commanding the entirety of his family indirectly, never forgetting to include their descendants for an infinitely processing perpetuity. Our only hope, my only hope perhaps, is that elder gods, and we'll talk about what I mean by that a little later, will eventually restore us to former estates, that the truly shining ones, venerated by our proud ancestors, will in their own divine time punish those who would reduce each and every one of us to the position of a plantation slave. That is the agenda. I find those ideas obnoxious, I find them poisonous, and it almost goes without saying that no person of the right mind, we are not part of the global elite. Everyone in this room is not. Please forget that. It's just obnoxious beyond compare. Any critique of the origins and so-called progress, that's a word that covers a multitude of sins, isn't it? Demonstrating little apart from the economic depravity daily established by the dominant classes. So, anarcho-primitivism, hence a school of thought which has influenced me very, very powerfully for a number of years, would start its assertions by saying the very shift from hunter-gatherer to agricultural subsistence gave rise to unfair and immoral social stratification, along with the subsequent coercion necessary to keep it going and the inevitable ennui that follows. Words like alienation are much less helpful than ennui, boredom. That's the best translation, isn't it? They're bored, let's get drunk, let's have casual sex, bored, and never knowing really why. This is why the majority of heathens, I'm here today as a heathen, not a particular partisan in heathenry. I've been adopted by Asatru, Vanatru, Odinists and Wotanists. I'm a nice heathen, which of course means all certain things. Advocate a return to non-civilized ways of life. Through deindustrialization, the abolition of divisions within labour, and the deconstruction of culturally malignant specializations. Not to mention an abandonment of large-scale organisational technologies. So it's at this point we have to dig a little deeper. What does it mean to be a heathen? I remember my mother saying years back, if you don't go to church, you'll be a heathen. And my God, she was right. I did turn into a heathen. But what does it mean? What does it mean in ages past, or indeed in our contemporary world? Also, how may the tradition, I mean that's almost an oxymoron, isn't it? The tradition of dissent. It is a church phrase, of course. The tradition of dissent seen as anything other than the internal contortions of a disenfranchised proletariat, struggling to find a satisfying sense of place and purpose within Christian institutions seemingly designed to alienate their own lower orders. I have very great friends in the Roman Catholic Church, by the way. One is a Jesuit, a completely overawing status, and they would very happily claim that, yes, that's one of the reasons it's done. Ironically, I suspect answers start to surface from the witch trials, but you didn't think that, of Puritan America during the 17th century. I can't confess to be obsessed with such things, I'm not. But I was just thinking about it recently and thought actually it's clearly instructive of a lot of the phenomena happening in our society at the moment. Maybe not so much from the now infamous hearings and prosecutions of colonial Salem, I mean that's always the one that comes to mind, but in the testimonies gathered throughout a wider variety of towns, villages and territories across these provinces at that time. After all, even a cursory reading of preserved transcripts revealed the real reason for the mindless persecutions was a fear that ancient heresies from old European religions were finding root in their New Jerusalem. Americans love portraying these settlers as these sort of nice, bright capitalists in embryo form. You know, they're all rational, they're secular really, they don't mean it. They were setting up a theocracy, that was what they were trying to do. They were a nation of priests, self-identified. They weren't trying to found capitalist America. That goes far too easy to the side. What they were afraid of with these heresies, as a case in point, was, say, cakes and wine. In Wicca, maybe we can get some Q&A at the end, I don't know what the protocol is. They certainly have, in the middle of their rituals, a breathing space where cakes and wine are used as part of the ceremonial love feast. I'm trying to introduce that into my particular group of heathenry. That was actually practiced thousands of years ago, before Jesus Christ was a twinkle in anybody's eye, with present love and respect to any Christians in the room. It's rediscovered as one of our heathen practices at this time, and then they accuse us of blasphemy for something we were doing before they were doing it, with bread and wine. There we are. As evidence of this seeping taint, remember they thought witches were travelling with them to the New World. They were in disguise. They were trying to spoil the theocracy, like a new serpent in their Eden. That's what they were afraid of. Evidence of this taint, the witch-finders, that wonderful group of humanitarians, cited cases where young women had spoken with, I quote, a loose tongue upon a number of lascivious subjects. Sex. Moreover, there are examples of mature women dressed, I quote, in the fashion of a man, while labouring with the other menfolk. Isn't it interesting? In theatre, you get very used to the fact that clothes are not neutral. Clothes make or break a play. If you get the character wrong in the clothing, you've destroyed the play. Clothes are not neutral, Okay? They make an atmosphere, they generate a context. You are very, very clear about the interaction of the characters. It's very important to think, what does it mean in real terms? And certainly if you're thinking of things like Joan of Arc, in our own European context, it was the minute she put on men's clothing in jail that the persecutors said again, you're a witch. They were going to let the trial drop. No, you're a witch. Why are you dressing like a man? Something going on there. And if these acts were not seditious enough, women making jokes and dressing in a practical fashion, if they were not seditious enough in the day-to-day activities of the Puritan theocracy, it was felt that women were rising above their biblically sanctioned station. By heavens, they behaved in an equal and open manner to their husbands in public places. Does it never end? Oft-times forgetting their bonnets, and even laughing in carefree abandon. In Rev'd, a couple of years ago, oh my God, dating myself 10 years ago, there were some characters being developed for the Halloween circuit. They were called the Reverend Whipham and the Reverend Burnham. I hope you get that. And the characters would begin with, evil, evil, all this evil everywhere. You know, come on, come on. But that's what they saw. So what was the source of all this evil? Female sexuality, along with adoration for the basic stuff of life surrounding ordinary and unlettered citizens, because these things were perceived as dangerous pagan as well as seductively earthy. Heathenry, from my perspective, is the real old fertility religion. It's the real thing from the past. We worship the berries that we eat, the livestock that we cater for, that we eat as well. It's a symbiosis, the great family of life. And that was seen as dangerous to those Puritans and new Puritans, which we'll discuss. Moreover, these alluring experiences were constructed as distractions from prayer or as unclean. That's a very interesting word throughout the centuries, isn't it? Almost rival types of dissent. And that's the rub. They thought that the witches, the heathens in their midst, were actually a rival form of dissenting faction. But the trouble is they weren't Christian. And that was the source of the paranoia within the Puritan communities. It wasn't the Native Americans, it was the enemy within, that old invisible bugbear. Based on these behaviours, it was felt an equal longing for the purity of the primordial, albeit in that manner was against Christian dogma or gospel teaching. That was their view. I'm not saying it's every Christian's view, that was their view. And certainly one of the principal anxieties of the Pilgrim settlers was that heathens, or dare they use the word witch, or as it says in the transcripts, people of the heath. That is what a heathen is. When the glory of the feudal system had finally conquered the good hearts of this country, the aristocratic feudal lords would give a certain area of land for people like us. Of course, it had to be unfertile, non-productive, and of no real use on the estate, where we could meet together and worship whatever we wanted. It didn't really matter. Get married in whatever you want, it doesn't matter. The church isn't involved, it isn't interested. But you can meet there because it's nothing. So the people of the heath could do anything they want in any way they want, and they were identified as the true witches. And these people travelled alongside them in disguise, seeking their own freedom in the new world. Thus, with a venomous intolerance and paranoid suspicion, characteristic of most of the Abrahamic faiths, if not all of them, these gentlemen set to their victimizations with a truly energetic gusto. There are some wonderful human beings from that period who would take great delight in torturing old ladies until they confessed to anything, crushing the bones of young ladies who were looking for a husband, and terrorizing entire communities because they were right and Jesus Christ had told them that personally. Wonderful stuff. Without doubt, the Puritans were afraid of heathenry and its attendant political anarchism. For the Puritans, it was the same thing in different forms. In their newly established Israel, in other words, they intuited a direct association between these, I quote, twin temperaments, each of which was interpreted as unscriptural and therefore against the common Christian good of the pilgrim settlers. Perhaps that is why, as an initiated priest of Earth Mother Nerthus myself, I was initiated by Freya Aspen a couple of weeks ago. Nerthus is the Nordic way of talking about Gaia or Pachamama. Tacitus is the one that quotes the name. I am more or less convinced that they were correct, especially if one tries to visualise the practical implications of a heathen worldview in terms of its attendant lifestyle. You know, if it's all in the head, it's nothing. You've got to live your beliefs. If you don't live your beliefs, you don't believe those things. The end. Which, to my mind, is best advocated in the American context within the book Walden by Henry David Thoreau. Yes, I'm that sort of anarchist. Okay. I was talking about all these people that anarchists don't talk about nowadays. You will always end up with a materialist Marxist-Leninism in disguise, and I don't know why. Anarchism is rich, the literature is sophisticated. Why is it always this one stream of writers that mostly would have hated Marxist-Leninism anyway? But that's something else as well. Thoreau. Not only did the author Thoreau live his ideas, he actually went out and did it. But he advanced to his readers the joys of self-sufficiency, transcendentalism. Please don't think that's an easy word to throw around. It can mean all sorts of things, particularly if people of that calibre and sophistication are using the idea. You know, it's not pie in the sky when you die. They actually mean something quite discursive, discussable, debatable. And the advantages of simple living amid the bounties of the environment. Obviously, this is why many critics have seen Thoreau as one of the precursors of contemporary ecological concerns, as well as an opponent of industrial civilization itself. Ideologies arguably represented in our own time by theorists such as John Zerzan, who ironically was born in Salem. I mean, there must be an irony somewhere. I was offered a professorship last year over in New England. I was really tempted to take it. I love the idea of a witch going back to Salem and saying, Yabu Sats, we won. You know, all these centuries later, we won. Mick, good afternoon, my dear friend. Good to see you. As I say, John Zerzan, born in Salem, and reflected in essays within his treatise Against Civilization, Readings and Reflections. At that point, I'd like to make a brief aside. In the 19th century, a so-called anarchist naturism flourished throughout new right individualist circles meeting in France, Portugal and Spain. In addition to luminaries like Leo Tolstoy, I'm trying to put on some of his works in theatre next year. They're so rich, it's next to impossible to do. I mean, Tolstoy gives you life, he gives you the world, it's terrible. And I know he talks about Christian anarchism, and that Jesus Christ is actually the rational faculty, I know that, but I think he's more on our side than the church's side. The churches did excommunicate him after all. So Leo Tolstoy, recluse amongst others, openly defended heathen attitudes, including nudism, what shock and horror, free love, Christian construct, if you only have one partner, there's only one God, have one partner, one best friend. Sorry, it's monotheism in disguise. Why? And, believe it or not, vegetarianism. If we all turned vegetarian, the world could feed itself without Monsanto trying to control the food supply. Yeah. I'm on their hit list, by the way. Monsanto personally hate me. They send me emails telling me that. I'm so proud of that. Vegetarianism, being far ahead as these authors were of their time and upholding traditional eco-villages, traditional lifestyles as the most ecologically effective way to live, and as alternative to the social determinism of industrialized mass culture, which personally horrified brilliant social analysts and my personal hero, Pierre-Joseph Proudhon, who, by the way, used to wipe the floor with Karl Marx at each of the internationals and it's never reported because he hated the press. That established, several researchers deny that this species of anarchist thought, especially anarcho-primitivism, since all this had started with an argument about anarcho-primitivism, I thought I'd talk about it today, and especially anarcho-primitivism, have anything to do with the mainstream ideology of freedom. Remember, anarchism is seen as one particular thing by a great majority. Although others, such as Wolfie Landstretcher, very curious man, I think I'll write a book about him, what I like and what I don't like about Wolfie Landstretcher, endorsed the critique and even its heathen metaphysic, which he does rather grudgingly. Although he is quick to distance himself from anarcho-primitivists, in practice, academics. His academic allies have argued, of course, this is due to an anarcho-primitivist and heathen focus on the praxis of achieving a feral state of being through the process of rewilding. I'm not even sure what half of them mean, and I've never actually sat down in a room with them to ask them, but he's convinced he knows what they mean. Well, maybe so, my dear friend. However, heathens would claim that everyday experience is the key to personal evolution, and that the heathen holiday of May Day, for example, whereupon summer sunshine is celebrated through song and festival, our religion is natural and earth-based, should be encouraged as one of the potential points of remembrance. For us, it's a question of recollection. You're not teaching anybody anything. You're reminding them of what's deep within them already. I was talking to Troy a minute ago about hammers and sickles. Artifacts like the hammer and sickle and pentagram star. Why do the hammer and sickle always have to be left-wing symbols? Why? I don't see that at all. They're symbols of a working man. I don't see why they're left-wing. Again, it's this sort of, theft of intellectual property by the left that's constantly telling us, no, this is what it means. And then we all give in. We all buckle under the pressure, although of course they're right. It's some sort of other gospel truth according to Karl Marx. Nonsense. Anyway, hammer, sickle and pentagram star, which I have seen flying over these fields as signifiers of independent and empowered human beings, the anarchist ideal. Indeed, for contemporary heathens, I suspect all of these symbols actively stress a universal continuum in which every creature plays an integral part. This is one of the reasons why political and religious globalists, they fascinate me, have long feared the contextualizing march of heathen and anarchist principles in unison. Some of you know the circles I am privileged to move in. That is the one real thing they all hate. The thought that those two things might come together. They're not interested in the new left. What is Moscow doing these days? What's Beijing doing these days? Talking to accountants about the global economy. Please don't kid yourselves. That is what they are doing. What the powers at the top don't want are groups like this managing to talk together and extend networks, and you're talking about two active principles that represent a real political challenge. Mention that in those circles and it's like talking to a hot cage of bewildered monkeys. That is the one thing they really seriously don't want. And I'll invite you to some of these things if you doubt that. In their literally polluted view, after all, pollution can make money, it was already a step too far, that was said to me recently, when Earth Day emerged in 1972, promoting for them a decidedly anarchist agenda. Additionally, albeit under the somewhat surprising auspices of the United Nations, this concept has developed into the overtly heathen and therefore doubly dangerous International Earth Mother Day. Was a priest of the Earth Mother. I'm very happy with that. Suggesting, of course, as this does, rights for Mother Nature herself, along with an agenda visibly propelling to these wonderful individuals, visibly propelling, excuse me, I've lost my place, an agenda which they find deeply subversive and empowered by the indigenous Andean culture of all things. Ever alarmist in overall stance, the globalists managed to shoot themselves in the foot when recognising worship of their version of the earth deity Pachamama. It's enshrined in UN constitutions, if you doubt that. Fearing as they do any debate on whether Gaia, her ecosystems and other non-human entities should be given legal rights. I don't think there's time today to start talking about the liberal use of the word rights. Again, I think liberal ideologues have rather shanghaied that word. Rights can be interpreted in many ways, and they can mean many things, legally, non-legally. You know, I'm amazed at the appropriation by the globalists of symbols that don't really belong to them and ideas that actually are anathema to their whole enterprise if you begin thinking about it. Their magic, their subterfuge is to claim the territory and then stop people thinking about it. So it sounds like a fait accompli. Enlightenment. Strangely mirroring, enlightenment concerns heathens in a manner reminiscent, I didn't say similar, I didn't say the same, I said reminiscent, of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, one of my heroes. Tend to think that human beings are indeed born in chains, but deserve to be unshackled. Only then can each ethnic group find its individual destiny. Reflecting Rousseau, we assert that as societies universalise and complexify, from primitive, he's very unclear what he means by that in translation as well as in French, forms into structural hierarchies, natural inequalities among men, ladies forgive me, among people, were replaced by artificial and politically enforced divisions. And he talks about the almost cult of talent. What keeps all this nailed down, the cult of talent amongst the bourgeoisie? Oh my God, you're a brilliant brain surgeon. No, they wouldn't do that, would they? Oh my God, you're a brilliant accountant. Let me give you £1 million and make sure there are no nurses in hospitals. You're worth much more than that. Also, we tend to agree with Jean-Jacques when he argues that the state of unadulterated savagery from which we emerged is not in itself desirable. Some of my interlocutors on Facebook thought I was advocating a return to the early Stone Age. I hate my own views being caricatured, although I wasn't there. Perhaps it was much nicer. You know, perhaps they had a much nicer time than us, but I wasn't there, so I'm not really advocating it. From the existential, they say, we want to return to it. Let's go back to this undifferentiated existential. That's not what heathens want. We accept we're from an undifferentiated existential, but we want to find the personal, our own state of being, within a natural order which we do not command anyway. Only our opponents level that charge at us. Rather, heathens search for a balance of conditions in our modern world, which will allow a full flowering of human potentials, resistant to the ignorant thrall generated by a manufactured governance, which is what we live in now, wherein virtue is seen as stupidity. Why are you trying to be a good person? Get a good bank account. And life is never measured by healthy instinct, elevated conscience, or a caring heart. In fact, those things are counterproductive and they stop you earning. Thenceforth, since they appear to have miraculously recovered their own sense of identity, supposedly backward third world nations have taken the lead in these matters. We should be ashamed of ourselves. To heathen minds, along with a local revival in our part of the world, which is only just starting thanks to people like Wolf, of Nordic folk consciousness in Northern Europe. I'm against this universalisation of absolutely everything. Why? Who benefits? Like this bland and blanking light. You know, in theatre you have super troopers, the great arc light, and there's one being shone at our civilization at the moment. So you can't see anything, you're disoriented, and everything looks the same, and you're so much easier to control. Why? What's wrong with diversity? Diversity's everything. As heathens, we ask for a restoration of folk values. You can all shout at me for that in a minute. and cite, believe it or not, present Bolivian legislation, where it proudly proclaimed 11 rights for nature and a ministry of Mother Earth to act as its ombudsman. What is more, we heathens defend analogous claims made on December the 28th, 2008 in Ecuador, when their constitution enshrined rights for nature by stating, you'll have to forgive me, I'm all over the place because I need new glasses, nature or Pachamama, where life is reproduced and exists, has the right to exist, persist, maintain itself and regenerate its own vital cycles, structure, functions and its evolutionary processes. Any person, people, commodity or nationality may demand the observance of the rights of the natural environment before public bodies. I know people at the European Parliament, I can't think of one of them that would even know what that means. And I can't imagine Dave talking about those things. Although of course he did, didn't he, for the last election. There are all these wonderful photographs of him cuddling huskies in the far north. Whatever happened to all that? So, understood, initial steps towards a civil earth religion by localised clans gained propulsion. Hey, that's not a radical idea. There was a book years back, it came out, I think, when I was an undergraduate. What was it? E.F. Schumacher, Small is Beautiful. Nothing radical in that. Northern nations, I suspect, need to do likewise. Unless, therefore, one is beholden to the generalist paradigms of global deceit. There is nothing to fear from these tribal initiatives, because what they're actually saying is what is wrong with a love for all of life and the planet itself. And as such, heathens agree with them and decry the universalism that I'm implacably against, saying that just as Earth Mother must be able to regenerate her biodiversity, each and every people needs to recover the vital cultural differences underpinning their sense of identity. Have you noticed the thing that takes up most time legally at the international level? Concepts of identity, political identity. That is an attack upon all of us, and that's a very interesting and clever attack. Exploitation, to my mind, is the real driving power behind universalist thinking, and it must not be open-ended. There is a limit, and that rubric must be the ability for animal, vegetable and forest organisms, of water sources, of the very atmosphere to reinvigorate. If the globalists consume, or even worse, waste more than Mother Earth is capable of recreating or replacing, then we are bringing our home, our parent, to rack and ruin, while little by little choking all living beings along with our own descendants. Thus we need to learn how to embrace the best from the past. One of those books over there is saying the same thing. And recall the ways of our kinsfolk while focusing very clearly on the future. The one thing with present love and respect to Wolf, who is a man I've only just met today in person, but I have a huge regard for. The trouble with heathenry is we're all 1,000 years ago. The Vikings didn't want to live 1,000 years before the Vikings. The migrations, the invasions started because of internal economic problems. They needed land, they needed to expand. They were thinking of the future. We need to do the same. Let me round off, I've probably taken far too much time. Maybe one day life will be for the likes of us. Maybe, not necessarily. And there will be no underclass. But I suspect this will only happen when we have recovered our sense for the sanctity of all life, because it puts everything in perspective. In the specific and in the particular. And at this juncture, heathenry really is seen as a religion of living elements, of living earth, conscious air, breathing fire and liquid water. And at that time they'll be remembered as our ancestors. In a British context, perhaps particularly water, since the enduring presence of Nerthus, I was reminded about this morning, is remembered in Arthurian tales of the Lady of the Lake. She was the Lady of the Lake. and she was the sustainer of life's great family in the old religion which I represent. Meaning, of course, that a disposition of dissent, it is a tradition. There are always people that think enough's enough, and they always tend to be the good-hearted people. What happens is a fissiparity. Everybody's searching for the good, and everybody thinks they've got the answers, then all these terribly contentious arguments start, instead of looking for common ground. In heathenry, I'm the guy that's looking for common ground. We must find what links us. We're very aware of what doesn't. And this must be the hallowed goal of all of us here as well, I suspect. When this is done, the witch trials in Salem reveal a puritanical globalist perspective. It's the same set of Puritans who believe they've got an answer but don't care about the results. And why will I never go along with that? Because they always prove so frail in ethical judgment, as well as strikingly deficient in compassionate empathy. Globalism is about results for the greater good, but nobody's identifying in who constitutes the greater good. And at that point, I think I'll stop. Thank you for listening. I don't know if it's the custom here to have Q&A. I'm totally intimidated by Troy Southgate anyway. So, who I wanted to meet for a very long time, so I'm like a schoolgirl at the moment.
It is the custom, yeah.
Right.
Do I have any questions?
Any Q&A?
Yeah.
That's it, Frank.
We've, in the search for the common ground within religions, many organised religions are tempted to seek to maximise the common ground by excluding people at the margins. I'm thinking in particular at the moment in the Church of England. Stephen Sizer is being targeted in the Church of England, and Bishop Richard Williamson is being targeted in the Roman Catholic Church. Are there similar temptations and dangers within heathenism, or within aspects of the heathen tradition, where people seek to marginalise certain people or exclude certain people in order to extend an appeal to a sometimes mythical common sense or common ground or moderation?
I think we've got to be careful what we mean by common ground. And my reading, I mean, I actually know Rowan Williams. I actually know him. What they tend to mean in Anglican terms is a majority, not necessarily a common ground. That is a very different way of looking at things. You know, what was the thing in the Middle Ages? You know, did Christ own his own clothes? You know, in other words, should the church be rich and powerful in a material sense? With church speak, you've always got to think, right, I'm taking a breather, I'm taking a step back, what do they mean? My perspective as the pet pagan of the Anglican Communion, I get invited to everything, I'm not sure why, would be that they're not actually talking about a common ideology or conceptual themes which they share. They're talking about various large minorities joining into an even bigger minority and therefore achieving some sort of hegemony. And certainly, I'm outside all of this. Whether there are female bishops or not is not really on the top of my list of things to think about. It does end 2,000 years of Catholicity. That struck my mind. Also, without naming names, some of the ladies seeking that authority really doing it as a career move as opposed to the good of the church, which fascinates me as well. I'm sorry, I've been in charge of this church for so many years, why shouldn't I? Whoa, it's about you, man. I'm suspicious of those terms. In heathenry, there is no common ground. We all hate each other. As the recent thing demonstrated, I had a hail of emails from people who would not be seen in the same room if such and such turned up, or such and such was going to donate Ricani some food, some sandwiches. I will not eat that sandwich. Common ground I'm looking for in heathenry, because I still have this ridiculously old-fashioned belief that divisions are important, but there is something beneath the division. For instance, someone accused me of unadulterated racism the other day. I can't quite see where that came from. I've never denied that there was a human race. What I'm talking about is natural healthy divisions in cultures and biodiversity. I've not actually said there's no human race, I don't remember that. And some of my best friends are Muslim. Childish stuff, isn't it? No, I appear to be the only person looking for common ground in modern heathenry. But it's because we're new and we're a revival, and we can't point to a scripture. You know, Isaiah says in chapter 43 that. We can't do that. Therefore, we can't appeal to tradition in the sense I was critiquing here. We've got to appeal to common sense if and when that ever manifests. And think, okay, it's a new movement, it's an energised movement, it's a movement with huge power and potential, but there are very few of us, and we're trying to find those links and those bonds, and it's very difficult at this stage. So that would be my answer to that. But we do need to find them.
Yeah, would you define anarchism more like a stateless society, or would you define it more like a state without government?
In what sense you need to? Because that could go into many different.
Yeah, in some of the anarchists I've met online,
yeah.
I thought what they meant by anarchism was a stateless society. It was a society without a state, without a constitution, without laws.
Yeah.
But I've subsequently found out that, particularly in America, libertarian anarchists, they do believe in a state, but they just believe that there should be no government enforcing that state and its laws. So which one would you veer on?
I mean, you mean me personally, or how do I analyse those particular structures?
What kind of anarchism is it that you promote exactly?
Promote? That's a much bigger word. I think there are very many wise points of orientation within anarcho-primitivism. Though I don't want to suddenly wear bear skins and go and beat young ladies over the head with a club and hunt dinosaurs. What I'm talking about is a sense of balance, that technology doesn't govern life. I'm a slave to my mobile. In theatre, you're a slave to these things. But there must be a greater perspective. Therefore, I'm interested in the insights of the people within anarchism from that particular school of thought. That doesn't mean I slavishly adhere to everything they say. My own critique of anarchism as a movement is also actually one of its blessings. We can start from any position philosophically and we can build a case, and that's incredibly healthy. My worry is that anarchism is all things to all men, ironically. That's not the same thing, of course. Therefore, we don't actually know even after 15 seminars, what Professor so-and-so thinks, and is he really saying blah, blah, blah. On a personal level, I suspect we do need very clear cultural diversity, because that's the way human beings are. And I'm suspicious of those people and their motives who are attacking that sort of cultural diversity. I don't trust them one bit, and I think, how does one judge that? By their fruits ye shall know them, and their fruits tend to be maximising profit and destroying whole areas of a particular country. So that would be my view on that.
But do you believe in the innate sovereignty, the innate supremacy of the concept of a state? You don't?
Nietzsche said the state was a lie, and I agree with him completely. Within national anarchism, I've noticed some people talk about a borderless world. My own interpretation of national anarchism must mean it cannot mean that. But it depends what you mean by border, it depends what you mean by boundary. And that's therefore we're into some very interesting discussions over the next few years. Well, I'm nice and friendly. Do ask something. I'm overweight, but I'm friendly.
You've mentioned culture, and you've mentioned kinfolk, etc. Would you like to talk about where race fits in, the concept of race, or the reality of race, which we know is generally under attack from the established South?
Well, I mean, on a biological level, genetic level, there are only 5 races that I've known of. I've got a dear friend, Klaus Donner. We're holding in April the European All Thing in Tallinn in Estonia, which will be a much more enlarged version of the philosophical circus we staged recently. Even science is beginning to admit there are other types of human being, hobbits in our official theory. I am told that these elongated skulls in Ecuador are actually being unearthed in particular regions, and they're not mutations, and they're not people with bone disease, they're actual communities. So but even then, there are only certain types of race genetically. I'm more comfortable talking about ethnicity because I think race is absolutely a massive and complicated subject. And I'm trying to find my way through it. If somebody throws at me the word theatre or love or beauty, I think I'm beginning to understand those things at 54. I'm not sure I've understood them as much as I'd like to. Race is absolutely vital for an understanding of who you are and what you are and where you're going. But if you want me to narrow that down into how that manifests on a localised or ethnic level, I think that's a whole other discussion, which I'd be honoured to give, but I need to think about that and put it in some words before I answer. But it's a vital issue. The people that are attacking that are afraid of the empowerment that that sense and that consciousness can deliver, that it can give. That would be my view. So.
Why do you use the term heathen instead of pagan? Because heathen is a pejorative term, whereas pagan is neutral. Is it that you do not equate the two? Are they synonymous or not?
I spent the last 3 months arguing about that. Right, internal divisions within the pagan community. Right, most of the time, for the sake of clarity, I say pagan. Because people sort of know what you mean. I don't accept heathen is only a pejorative term. I would check that. Certainly the church uses it as a pejorative term. Well, I'm not in the church. I mean, a person of the heath. I mean, pagan, pagani, an ignorant guy from the forests. So heathen, a member of the common ground. Poor person. I don't see why that's pejorative. I'm talking as a heathen because I was invited to speak as a heathen. I mean, if I'm talking to the wider community, I tend to say pagan. To a certain extent, these divisions are meaningless. Within the pagan community, I think heathenry has come to identify itself as a certain type of Northern European pagan revival. One of my best friends is Maxine Saunders, the Witch Queen of England, and she's made a career out of being a Wiccan, but within the community, within the pagan community, maybe we're trying to hammer out certain truths and certain ideologies, so my attitude would be dual to that. I mean, I'm a pagan if I'm talking to people who haven't got a clue what I'm talking about otherwise. But within the pagan community, I'm a heathen because I'm talking about Northern European traditions, not the witch cults of Sicily or the gods of Rome. I'm not talking about that. And within heathenry, I would say, within heathenry that's positive, and I would say, why have I used that word? Because that's what I was invited to speak about today. No mixed questions, I think.
It seems to me one of the biggest, whopping lies told by the current system is that they want to introduce diversity.
Yeah.
And it's quite obvious to me they want exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
100%. It's the sort of double speak, George Orwell. You say one thing, but you mean the reverse. On one level, I'm tempted to say, wouldn't globalisation be a wonderful idea? I mean, you've got to be a caveman not to think the idea is good if it was workable. There's a big if there. And if we're talking about elected representatives in a real democracy, I've yet to find a real democracy, sorry. Elected representatives with constitutions defining their roles, and I can see how they can be got out of office, then I'd think, okay, let's start talking about that. But nobody's saying that, and that's not the reality of what is happening. It's a group of the super rich telling us all that we'll be touching our fetlocks like in the Middle Ages, yes my lord, no my lord, as they go by in their limos. I'm totally against that. They say diversity, but I agree 100%. That's the furthest thing from their mind. You can be different just like me. I'm still friendly. Okay, let me round off with a poem. I bet no one's ever done that before. This was from my second collection. Still available in the shops, $9.99, a very good Yule gift. Not listed there, but we'll work with trying it. Let me just read this to you briefly. Dark the dawn, but bright the day, I drained the bitter dregs full draught of sweetly honeysuckled indecisions, coming home to heart and hearth, while praising old English spirits with mead, with serenades, and with kisses. And like the ever-mysterious bee in bliss, whose world is dewdrop and blossom, began a war dance, ever wielded like a weapon to wound and whittle away my wolfish antagonists, and embodying the strength to defend my motherland, to deliver my own kith and kindred, through muscular moves as perfectible as heraldic analogy, when orchestrating new Burgundian victories above both rust and gravity. Thank you.